Hey everybody, Chris Orlob here, and in this quick video, I'm going to teach you a powerful sales technique to close more large deals, and it comes down to expanding your customer's field of vision when it comes to the problem you solve and the opportunity at stake. And here's how it works. A few months ago, at the time of this recording, my startup, or one of my startups, closed a $98,000 deal, which is our biggest one yet at the time. Now, despite the fact that we made that happen, that deal started out pretty rough. Okay, we sell to CROs and I could not get to the CRO, otherwise known as the Chief Revenue Officer. The head of recruiting didn't feel that their sales hiring issues were big enough to justify spending time with the CRO. So in this context, we're selling sales hiring software to sales organizations. And here's how this unfolded. First of all, there was no way that I was going to go over the head of recruiting's head. We would have to work together closely if we closed this deal. So here's how we turned this nice to solve business pain into must solve and got that introduction to the Chief Revenue Officer. So here's how the conversation went. He said, "This is interesting, but I have to protect our Chief Revenue Officer's time. We should revisit this next year." And I said, "That might make sense, but can I ask you a few questions before we move on?" "Sure," is what he said. So then I asked, "We started talking because you were behind on your account executive headcount plan. Plus there were a few attritions that put you further in a hole. Is that still a priority for you?" And he said, "It is, but my problem is not worth spending lots of our CRO's time on." In other words, he was referring to it as his problem rather than the CRO's. So I said, "Okay, tell me a little bit more. How far behind are you on your headcount plans?" And he said, "We're behind by about 6 account executives." So I asked, "How long does it take a new account executive to ramp? And what are they producing when they're ramped? How much revenue are they bringing into the business?" And he said, "It takes about 5 months. And at that point, they're closing around $50,000 in ARR per month by that point." So I said, "If you were on plan and those account executives you mentioned were ramped, you'd see around $300,000 more in annual recurring revenue closed per month." Right? We're talking about 6 account executives that he was behind on his headcount plan times $50,000. That's 300 grand a month. And he said, "Yes." So I said, "Again, if they were hired and ramped, that's another 900 grand on the board between now and the end of the year." Okay. This was just a few months before year end. I think this was in October or so. And I said, "Does that math check out with you?" And he said, "Yeah." And I think he kind of sensed where I was going with this at this point. So I asked and I validated, is that ARR, is that revenue amount meaningful enough for your Chief Revenue Officer to care, or is that a drop in her bucket? And he said, "She'd care, especially when you annualize that amount. That's $3.6 million, right? That $900,000 was a quarterly amount. You times that by 4. Now we're talking about $3.6 million of opportunity cost in lost revenue." And I didn't say anything. There was just this long pause. And he said, "Plus we have far more aggressive headcount plans next year," insinuating that that number could get even worse because we're talking about more reps they could fall behind on when it comes to their hiring plans. So after the conversation wrapped up, the next day he introduced me to the Chief Revenue Officer, and they are now one of our strongest champions among our early customers for the QuotaSignal business. Now, here's the lesson for you as a seller or as an entrepreneur who is trying to pioneer or evangelize your solution. Customers and buyers do not always have the full picture of the problem you solve, right? It's your job to expand their field of vision. Okay, this head of recruiting was looking at the problem strictly as a recruiting problem and was viewing it narrowly through that lens. When I zoomed us both out so that we could look at the bigger picture ramifications of the challenge, now we were talking about big money left on the table, which did affect the Chief Revenue Officer big time. So one of the key takeaways is it's your job to expand their field of vision. You as a seller have these sales conversations every day, right? You probably do this twice a day, maybe even more. But for your buyer, this is their first time. Okay, so you have to take a leadership position by making them aware of the full magnitude and scope of the problem so that they appreciate the entire picture rather than the narrow view in which they're viewing it. So that's all for today. One thing I want to make you aware of is I teach how to create business pain that money follows in B2B tech sales, right? I teach how to find business pain that gets funded and create urgency. This is the exact 5-step discovery system that I taught the #1 producing sales organization at Gong to use to grow from $200,000 to $200 million in annual revenue in 5 short years. I've taught over 10,000 SaaS and tech sellers so far in SaaS Discovery Masterclass, which is the online video course in which I teach these methods. If you want to join us, go learn more at go.pclub.io/discovery. Go there now, and I'll see you in the next video.